Israel begins its ground offensive to take Gaza City. We will have reflections on the imminent Jewish New Year with a longtime friend of the podcast. And the President of France raises the threat of economic sanctions against Israel. And he conveys that message via one half of the Unholy hosting team. And it's not me. It's Unholy. I'm Jonathan Friedland in London.
And I'm Yonit Levy in Paris. It's Unholy, two Jews on the news. I will explain what I'm doing in Paris in a minute. We wanted to mention something else, Jonathan?
We did. If you are a listener to this podcast via Apple Podcasts, you'll notice it looks a tiny bit different because there is a new button on our page, as it were, which tells you that you can listen to bonus episodes if, big if, you are a friend subscriber to the pod. Now, lots of you already are, and we are hugely grateful. But if you're not, you need to become a friend or subscriber to hear all those bonus episodes, lots of extra content. We are doing an extra bonus episode this very week, Yonit. And the way to get those is to press that button and subscribe. So with that bit of promotional work done, what has taken you to Paris? There was a bit of a clue in our opening menu, but you're there on big work.
On assignment, the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, wanted to speak directly to the Israeli public and explain his rationale in moving forward, pushing forward an initiative to recognize a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly next week. So that is what I'm doing here. I should probably explain to our listeners.
Yes, rather than being there for the autumn, which is a beautiful time to be in Paris, you're there on conducting official business, an amazing exclusive to get a sit down with the French president. I mean, obviously, I think, tell us as much about it as you can, and also we'll perhaps hear just a few words from him. But I think the news point that came out of it was, despite all the desire to make nice, and of course, if he wanted to talk to the Israelis, and the best way to do that is through a sit down with you, but he obviously had a message for the Israeli people, but some of it was some quite strong medicine by the sound of things.
Yes, indeed. I mean, look, he went out of his way really to sort of explain his plan, to say why he thinks that a recognition of a Palestinian state would actually contribute to the security of the state of Israel. Speaking in English also, knowing that that would also be a way to speak to the Israeli public. I remind you that a few weeks ago, it was reported that Macron actually wanted to come to Israel before the UN General Assembly, and Netanyahu essentially said to him, either you retract your initiative or don't come. So I think this was a way to sort of speak to the Israeli public, perhaps above the head of the Israeli leader. And there were a lot of, there's a lot of sympathy and empathy for what Israel was going through. Of course, Emmanuel Macron was one of the first leaders who came to Israel after October 7th to show solidarity. But 2 years later, we are in a position in which he is moving forward with this initiative that many Israelis are, perplexed about. So as you said, he did try to explain this in many ways and say, look, the war in Gaza has to be over. There has to be some sort of horizon here, a diplomatic horizon. This is what we are suggesting. But he also said that this war is continuing because of, for political reasons, for no other reasons. Actually, Israel has already won the war in Gaza. And when I asked him about whether or not economic sanctions from Europe towards Israel are an option, he said we should discuss, but he wasn't ruling it out. So I think that is something that Israelis will pick up on in other issues. The issue of Iran, for example, he's very much on the same page with Israel, right? He said, there will be a snapback of sanctions against Iran. So all of that is part of this conversation with him. A lot of, I would say, tough questions about what the Israelis think and what they have been saying about him, particularly members of government in the past couple of weeks, and him answering. So perhaps we should listen to a part of that, a clip of that interview. What you're suggesting is that this heinous terror organization will be able to say to the Palestinian people that recognition happened because of October 7th. I mean, how is that not what many Israelis feel a reward for terrorism?
I will tell you what happened because of 7th of October. What Hamas created is precisely this war in Gaza and so many victims. This is what they created. And if you want to stop this vicious circle, you have to open a new way forward. This is my point. Otherwise, what is your solution? If we want to break this vicious circle, we have to say, Hamas is to be destroyed, dismantled, but the war approach had this effect with the top leaders, but it's not sufficient. And we want these millions of Palestinian people, which, by the way, are as well those We are part of the life of so many people in this region and in the world. Matter of fact, we have to offer them a political perspective in which, in the requirements we ask them a new education program, deradicalization, but a recognition of Israel and the right.
Obviously fascinating that he talked to you about directly this point about sanctions, not ruling them out, because it comes in the week when the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, did say that there is now a proposal to suspend the favourable trade terms that Israel does enjoy, EU being the biggest trade partner with Israel. So this really matters. And saying that, you know, if the horrific events, as she called them in Gaza, do not stop, then this is an option very much on the table. So they're obviously in sync there. But I'm interested in the part of your conversation that went through the argument that I know a lot of Israelis and supporters of Israel make, which is if you do this recognition, you are rewarding terror. You're rewarding Hamas for what they did on the 7th of October. It's obviously, we've talked about it ourselves, it's not my view, but I'm really interested to know what he made of that view and how he pushed back against it.
Yeah, so I think the question was asked in several different forms throughout the interview. What he was trying to say essentially is, first of all, so what if Hamas, I said to him, you know, Hamas welcomes this initiative by you. He said, so what? Hamas wants to annihilate Israel. It doesn't actually want a two-state solution. And he said, look, you need to somehow emerge from this, what he called this cycle of terror and of response to terror and of war. And we are trying to give that kind of a horizon for both peoples. And he said, look, a secure Palestinian state is actually the interest of Israel. I think I tried to push back and say, look, even people who support this idea and think it's the right idea think it's the wrong time because of the Israeli trauma, because of how we are still kind of trapped in the horrors of October 7th. But to him, it is the thing to do right now. He doesn't think that a Palestinian state would obviously be set up tomorrow. He thinks it's the beginning of a process. How much this will convince the Israeli public, I don't know, but for sure the authenticity of trying to speak to Israel means something in the sense that it is very important for him to at least explain why he initiated this to begin with.
Yeah, I seem to remember when you and I talked about the whole Palestinian statehood proposal, I was making that point that here in Europe, European capitals, in London, elsewhere, that notion of it somehow being a reward, it's just not seen that way. And it sounds like he absolutely articulated that to you. So just your assessment, I'm interested to know, obviously we can predict now what the Israeli right, what, you know, your colleagues on Channel 14 will say about this. But do you think the average, the sort of middle Israeli voter, will be persuaded, will be won over at all by this, and particularly by the sort of attempts to reach out and say, we do get it, we understand the pain of October 7th? Do you think anybody's listening to that? We know that at government level, no. But among the Israeli public, will there be takers for the message Macron was conveying to them via you?
I mean, look, we are in the sort of hours in which the interview was already conducted but not yet aired. I always think that I know what the response would be, and it always surprises me to any direction. So I have a hard time saying what I think. I think in a way, like in other countries, opinions have been so sort of coalesced already that I don't know how much of a difference it will make. I think even the people who, to begin with, would want to listen to him would at least appreciate the fact that he is trying to speak directly to the Israeli public.
Yeah, and short of being there, as we said, the best and most direct way to do that is sit down with one half of the Unholy team, and he's definitely seized upon that method. Look, in terms of timing, it comes as this big military operation that we have talked about for many, many weeks is now in its most direct phase, and that is the ground operation in Gaza City. There's just no doubt about how, I'll just sort of the perspective from outside is how much anxiety this has caused and anger. Just the notion that, according to the reporting, even in the Israeli media, yes, some 350,000 people have fled that city. I think that was the figure as of Tuesday evening. But it's estimated that as many as 600,000 people are still there. And the idea of saying, as the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz did, Gaza City is burning, when there are 600,000 mostly displaced people there, because these are people who've moved from other places, given the last 2 years. Also, we should emphasize that's where it's thought the hostages are, the remaining Israeli hostages. So when you say the city is burning, that's a terrifying message for everyone involved. But, I think the estimate from the Israeli military on Wednesday morning was that there had been some 150 strikes over the previous 48 hours. So just the scale of the bombardment, the intensity of it, in an area that has taken the whole Gaza Strip such a battering for 2 years. We know the Israeli military, including the chief of staff, had grave misgivings about this whole operation. And we talked about that on the podcast. I've given you the picture of how it's seen from outside. It's lamented and condemned almost universally outside. How is it being understood and read inside Israel? Of course, you're now in Paris, but when you were there, what was the sense about it?
Well, we talked about this. The fact that this war is at this stage contested by the Israeli public, that the majority of Israelis want the war over, and this operation is taking Israel in the opposite direction, deeper into Gaza. When you add to that what is clearly, behind closed doors, the dismay voiced by the chief of staff and others saying, you need to go to hostage deal, and this sort of clarity that this might hurt the hostages, to say nothing of Israeli soldiers inside Gaza. So there's a lot of trepidation around this operation. We should mention just something that happened this week and is important in that context, is that Netanyahu had this speech in which he talked about Israel becoming isolated and becoming super Sparta, and this sort of speech that was very, very dark. And the day after he conducted a press conference, which he doesn't do very often. That was the day that the Gaza offensive began. That's why I'm mentioning it. He didn't call for a press conference because of the Gaza operation. He called for a press conference to try and explain what he said about Israeli economy, because he realized that was cascading into a bit of a problem for Israel, what he said. By the way, if we connect it to what Macron said about sanctions, then perhaps Netanyahu wasn't wrong about warning, right? It's just the way in which it always seems like Netanyahu was talking about these things as if they are a natural disaster. It just happens. No, it happens because the government makes certain decisions. So this is where we are this week. Again, a lot of trepidation around what can happen. This sort of scheduling that the government is talking about is by the end of the year. This should end, coinciding with, I remind you, Steve Witkoff saying on Fox News that certainly the war will be over by the end of the year. By the way, we don't mean the Jewish year; we mean the 2025. So that is where the country is right now. I wouldn't say that the mood is elated around the sort of continuation of this offensive into Gaza.
Just three things I just wanted to say. I mean, the first
just
one
three?
is, I think, just I could say so many, but I'll confine myself to three. I mean, one is just I noticed that the condemnations, yes, European capitals, maybe that's just seen as usual suspects in Israel, but I noticed Arab nations also condemning this, including those that Israel has sought to cultivate as, silent or otherwise partners. And Qatar, obviously still stung by the attack by Israel on the Hamas leadership in Doha, condemning the Gaza City operation as a flagrant violation of international law. Just noting the diplomatic strain this is causing with the Gulf region. That's one. The other point is that the whole issue, and I know it's something you and I have talked about so many times, but the question of aid is back again very much. I think we might talk in a moment or two about this UN report from the Human Rights Commission. A separate report from the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said in its own report that there had been no food aid had entered northern Gaza since Friday after a key crossing had been closed by the Israeli military, and they're saying no direct aid entry points into northern Gaza are now open, and they're saying that this is causing, in their report, a resumption of the kind of aid crisis that was being warned of before. And in that, they were joined by a whole battery of aid, international organizations and NGOs, Doctors Without Borders and Oxfam and so on, saying there's a catalogue of human suffering, death, maiming, famine, children so traumatized by daily airstrikes they cannot sleep, and others who want to die to join their parents in heaven. This is all going on while the Gaza City ground offensive is happening. So this is a moment of maximum pressure internationally on Israel, even if we've come to conclude that not much of it goes anywhere. But the last thing was just on this super Sparta point. It reminded me very much, and you have to be of a certain age to remember, Enver Hoxha, the communist leader of Albania, who once told for his end-of-year address, he said, next year will be worse than this year, and the year after will be worse than next year. And we will be, if necessary, we'll eat grass, he said, to the people of communist Albania. Not an election winner. Something reminded me of that a bit in Benjamin Netanyahu talking down Israel's prospects, literally talking about it as an autarky, a country that is cut off from everyone else. That's why Albania popped into my mind, communist era Albania, and saying super Sparta. You and I have talked a lot about how Israel holds on to its younger generation, its talent, how it avoids a brain drain. What is to persuade someone who's got potential options to move to, Paris, where you are, or San Francisco, in some great tech job? Who wants to stay in super Sparta? Maybe the ideologues who are really, Ben Gvir's young followers, maybe they like the idea of super Sparta. But as a vision of Israel from its prime minister, it seemed bleak to me, and I'm not at all surprised he walked it back.
So, from Super Sparta to New Year, and we actually wanted to perhaps have a conversation that's a little more uplifting. This has become a tradition of ours in our, almost fifth year of Unholy, that we are talking with someone that is a very good friend of our podcast, a spiritual leader, and I think someone who has a few things to say to us about how to go into this new year.
Angela Buchdahl is the senior rabbi of the Central Synagogue in New York, which is thought to have the largest membership of any synagogue anywhere in the world. She's also the first Asian American to be ordained a cantor, as well as the leader of a Jewish congregation, and the author of an upcoming book, a memoir called Heart of a Stranger, an unlikely rabbi's story of faith, identity, and belonging. She is also very much a returning guest and friend of Unholy. We are a people of tradition, Rabbi Buchdahl, Angela, and it has become a tradition that we turn to you at exactly this time of year because, as a lot of our listeners, but maybe not all of them will know, we are entering the season of what we call the High Holy Days, with the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashana, imminent. We thought it would be helpful for some people who are kind of new to this, for you just to set the scene of what the High Holy Days are, but also, I think, within that, personally, a lot of our listeners who are celebrating Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, will be preparing for it. And I'm very interested to know how you yourself prepare for the new year as it comes closer and closer.
Well, as a rabbi, in a congregation especially, you could think of these as our World Series. It is the time when even Jews who have not been as connected often want to come and be in synagogue. I think that Rosh Hashana is the new year, and it is not just a time for celebration and joy and possibility and hope, which is all those things, but it's also a time of introspection and a cheshbon hanefesh, which means an accounting of our souls. We think about people in the secular New Year who make resolutions. They think, okay, in this New Year, I'm going to be better. I'm going to promise to do this. Well, we do that as a Jewish community kind of on steroids for 10 days, these days of awe. And we don't just do it individually. We do it collectively as a community. These are the ways we want to do better. So it's actually a very deep time for our community to gather and to think about the world that we want to build. So it's a lot of pressure. I think people have no idea what the life of a rabbi looks like, especially at this time of year. So I'll give you a little window how I prepare. I had no idea either when I decided I wanted to be a rabbi at 16. I thought that rabbis' days were filled with thinking big thoughts about God and the meaning of life and all of this. And frankly, I don't want to give it away in the book, but you'll see that's not usually what I get to spend my days doing. But for this period leading up to the holidays, I get this amazing opportunity to really think. I give a sermon on each holiday. That's it. My colleagues each give one. And I get to speak not only to the largest gathering of my congregation, which are thousands of people, but actually to a live stream audience, which is hundreds of thousands or 1 million people. So I better think of something that I am dying to say and what is really pressing. And so we start thinking in the spring about what our topics are. And then the expectation for my team is that we are studying and learning and reading over the summer and really digging into this and coming up with not just our own ideas, but what does our tradition have to teach us in this moment? That is really what I'm trying to do. So my intellectual preparation is that kind of fantasy life of what a rabbi gets to do. I'm digging into text, I'm reading, I'm thinking about this, and that's a huge part of my preparation over the last couple of months. In addition to that, I have very technical preparation. I have music rehearsals, cues rehearsals, and because we live stream out to we even have tech rehearsals for all of our services because I'm working across a couple of venues with 30 musicians, 12 clergy, guest honorees who are speaking. So you can't imagine with 13 cameras, we are actually, it's a production. We try to make it not feel like that when we're in it, but for it to feel seamless, there is a huge amount of preparation that happens for that. Of course, I have spiritual preparation, which is, involves going to my loved ones and asking for forgiveness for the many ways that I have fallen short this year. And then I have some physical preparation. I do probably my best thinking on some long bike rides, which I try to make sure I do. And I get a weekly massage in the month of Elul just to relieve some of the stress. So that's just a little window into what my life has looked like for the last month.
In our household, it's a lot about catering, which was the one thing I didn't
I will be honest, I'm not doing any of the holiday cooking. I leave that to someone else.
So I don't want to, our listeners will be listening to this before Rosh Hashana. And you said that you're thinking and you're deciding even on April what, our tradition has to teach us about this moment. So we don't want to spoil the whole sermon, of course, but can you tell us a little bit? This is the second year of the war, second year into everything we have all been experiencing around the world and in Israel, of course. What is your thinking on that moment that we are at right now?
Well, I started to feel there was something in the air. It's been brewing for a while now. And for lack of a better word, I'll just call it a war on empathy. I don't know if you remember when Elon Musk went on Joe Rogan's podcast and basically declared empathy like the greatest weakness of Western civilization. And we are seeing a way that empathy can be weaponized, and there's a frightening lack of empathy in the world right now. We're seeing even a lack of empathy, a kind of schadenfreude and vengefulness and glee for people who are getting murdered if you think differently. And there is a very deep human urge to have very selective empathy. And I think that right now we are seeing within the Jewish community and around this war an enormous drop of empathy for Israelis and the situation that Israel has been in, with a sense that, like, if you feel empathy for Palestinians and their terrible plight and the devastation that this war has wrought, that you somehow cannot feel it for what Israelis are going through. And vice versa. We have some who can only see it for their Israeli brethren, so they are unwilling to look at the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. And our tradition has always insisted that this is not finite. Our empathy is not finite, and we have to be able to feel it for the other. But this is not just about the war in Israel and Gaza. This is actually a collective societal issue right now. The way we are thinking about what it means to actually try to understand how to walk in someone else's shoes.
I'm thinking of the title of your book, Heart of a Stranger, and that word echoes loudly
Right.
in the Jewish tradition. Take care of the stranger. Remember, you were a stranger in a strange land. That instruction
Absolutely.
for empathy is deep in Judaism. Let's talk about your book. I mean, you touched on it before about your sort of fantasy of what being a rabbi was like, and you talk about when this idea first hatched in you, and you write that the first tug, which I like that word, towards being a rabbi came through song, and long-time listeners will know that you have delighted us with song on your previous appearances, but through Jewish music. And you write that a vocalization of longing, release, pain, and praise that bypassed the intellect and channeled to every nerve ending in my body. And you say it was like God heard me. When you were inside Jewish music and singing Jewish songs. I think this might be a cue for you to explain that why it was unlikely that you'd be a rabbi, where you were in Tacoma, Washington. I'm thinking of all those things, but why music was a draw.
I think that music was my native spiritual language. And frankly, I think that it probably is for most children. If you have ever worked with young kids, you see they kind of filter their world through song, almost as if they're living in the musical of their life. They will narrate, now I'm making a sandwich and I'm eating it and I'm going to the store. So, just why is it that impulse to kind of sing and be in music is so natural? A lot of us get embarrassed out of it over our years, but I was lucky that never happened to me. And I did not feel that sense of connection through music in Judaism in the beginning of my early life when I landed in Tacoma, Washington, which is not exactly the epicenter of the Jewish world. And I was in such a small synagogue that we had this wonderful rabbi, and he was, learned and caring and compassionate, but he was also totally tone deaf. And it was too small of a synagogue to afford a cantor. So the music was pretty lifeless and uninspiring in my synagogue. But when I was about 8 years old, this song leader kind of like flew into Tacoma from I don't know where, singing Jewish music, and she brought like Debbie Friedman and Bashana Haba'ah and Israeli music, and I was suddenly singing to God all the time on the swing set, and not only that, but this little teen choir, or actually kids choir she started, we recorded an 8-track album back then, and I felt like a rock star, and then we ended up singing on the bima at my synagogue, and I suddenly felt like I had found my place in Judaism through Jewish music. And I still, to this day, think that the easiest way to create a sense of community, to create a sense of divine presence, to create a sense of transcendence is through music. And it's a gift that I get to be a part of that with my community on a regular basis.
Still, there's a leap to be told here between this and deciding to become a rabbi. So tell us a little bit more about that.
A leap.
Quite a
yes.
leap.
I certainly didn't think that just because I was singing to God as a kid all the time that I could be a rabbi. I remember the first time at my bat mitzvah that my rabbi suggested maybe I should think about it, and I thought that was like impossible. There was no way. He was the only rabbi I knew. I couldn't be farther from what that looked like. And I also kind of thought, who wants to do that? Like be with all these dusty books and meet with annoying teenagers like me for bar and bat mitzvah. So I wasn't taken with that at first, but I remember that a turning point actually happened at my bat mitzvah in which I felt that I was the carrier of something big to this, not only to my own community and across the generations of my Jewish family, but also to a wider world, that there was something that this tradition offered that was so deep and meaningful. My first trip to Israel when I was 16 was on the Bronfman Fellowship, and that's a study program in Israel, and it was transformational for me. And I not only fell in love with Israel, which I deeply felt somehow at home, even though I was also wildly different than everybody else there at the time, but I also fell in love with Jewish learning. And I thought to myself, I can't believe that there's a job where this is what you get to do, is to think about these questions and to dig into these texts. And so I decided at 16 I wanted to be a rabbi, and it wasn't an easy path for me. I would say that my parents didn't take me particularly seriously when I said it, tried to steer me away from it actually a little bit. My mother, I remember when I told her, she got tears in her eyes, and she always believed I could do anything I wanted to do. But she said, but why would you want to do that? Why do you want to make it so hard for yourself? You've got all these strikes against you. Who's going to hire you? Fast forward 13 years ago, my installation at Central Synagogue, and she also was crying. But I think there to see her daughter, who she thought would never be accepted in the Jewish community, and she, as my mother, not being accepted in the community, to be installed as the rabbi of this historic congregation was, beyond my wildest rabbinic dreams, honestly. So,
well, let's talk about version. Just those strikes against you, as you put it. I mean, because there weren't many people like you around who were rabbis, in the sense of there weren't that many women rabbis, but also
zero.
There was zero, and certainly, your mother is Korean, and there weren't until you Asian Americans as rabbis. I just want to talk about that, because we've had you on the podcast before. We haven't really gone into either of these parts of your sort of life story.
By the way, I have to say, I have to just say, it is. I feel like a triumph often, that I feel like I get to just be Angela the rabbi, not just Angela the female rabbi, Angela the Asian rabbi. So I actually really appreciate that, because for so much of my early years as a rabbi, I often felt sort of tokenized, like, oh, I'm only being asked for this because, they need a woman on the panel of men, or they want to do their DEI like diversity pick, and I'm the Jew of color they're going to put on. So it actually does feel like in some ways a small victory that this is the third time I'm on this podcast and it's the first time we're talking about it.
Exactly.
But I'm happy to talk about it.
But it is in the book.
That's right. No, we'd never got into it before, but you do talk about it in the book, and it's so interesting because you say there are still those. Here you are leading this giant Jewish community, perhaps the biggest in the world. There are still those who would not recognize you as a Jew at all because your mother is not a Jew. And you've had some pretty tough moments, and the reader is looking at the character you, I think, give a pseudonym to, called Debbie, who speaks to you quite sort of harshly when you meet her. She's an American Jew. You meet her in Israel, and she says basically you're not Jewish to you, even though being Jewish is so sort of important. I want to know, I'd be interested to hear what you say about what impact that has had on you, and also whether that's something that was in the past. In other words, have attitudes changed? Do you encounter fewer Debbies now than you did when you were growing up?
I think it's important for listeners, especially who are not Jewish, but even those who are Jewish, to know that there is a halachic, meaning Jewish legal definition of your status as a Jew that is traced through the maternal line. And so in addition to the fact that I didn't have a Jewish name, Angela, or a Jewish face for most people, I also didn't have Jewish lineage according to sort of Jewish legal tradition. So these were among the strikes that I was that I had against me, in a sense. And I understood, even though it was deeply painful the first time that I was 16, the first time someone said, you're not actually Jewish because you don't have a Jewish mother. While it was deeply painful and actually completely destabilizing for my sense of who I was in the world. You have to understand that in Tacoma, I was the Jew. I was the Jewish representative of Tacoma, proudly so, and president of my youth group and song leading in my synagogue. So suddenly it was like my entire identity was like being pulled out from underneath me, and I wasn't expecting it. It surprised me. I understood in some way that it wasn't exactly personal. It was a halachic, a legal framework that was just the world that she inhabited. And I don't think she was trying in any way to be cruel. I just think that it was like, there is a way that you're Jewish and you're just not it. This has persisted for people who live in a Jewish legal framework in many ways. And it sometimes still rears its head. And sometimes it comes out in curious ways, and sometimes it comes out in very ugly ways. I mean, I'll never forget that when I was named as the next rabbi of Central Synagogue, that this Jewish press actually literally put a headline that said, it's official, non-Jews can be rabbis. And with a very disgusting, article and a very unflattering picture of me. And I thought to myself, wow, I could be named to one of the most important pulpits, and I still have people out there putting in headlines saying, I'm not even a Jew at all. So this is something I've fought for most of my life as a rabbi. I think one of the most gratifying things for me, and part of my impetus for writing a book like this, is that I think my very existence as the rabbi of Central has helped change these attitudes for people. And I have Jews of color who say, seeing that you are the rabbi of this congregation makes me feel like I can belong. And it's not even so overt. I think just subconsciously, like the next generation, the kids in my synagogue who grew up with me, it's really funny. They don't see this as unusual at all. One of my kids from Scarsdale a long time ago, he was riding home for Passover on a train from UPenn, and he saw a Korean and he said, "Are you going home for Passover?" And she just laughed at his face and she said, "What are you talking about? I'm not Jewish." And he goes, "Oh, well, that's funny. You look just like my rabbi." So, it's it's not, for them, that's not unusual anymore. So, and it's not just me. I mean, Jews of color in America now number somewhere in like around 15%, which is 1 million Jews in America. That is not a small number. You will still not see as many of us in affiliated spaces, because I think, unfortunately, the Jewish community still has some catching up to do in making, I think, people who don't always fit in the right box feel comfortable in Jewish spaces. And that is something on us that we need to continue to work on. But no question, this has shifted in the Jewish community. And certainly if you go to Israel, you see that there's not one way of looking Jewish. But I think that with a sort of more Ashka normative environment in America, there were questions for me all the time. And unfortunately, there continue to be for many who don't look Jewish.
So I remember the first conversation we had, which was, I think, 2019. So the decision to go through a giyur was for those people or for you, when you think about that?
I remember that when my Jewish identity was questioned, that people said to me, "Don't worry, you could just have a giyur," which is a conversion, and convert to Judaism. My immediate reaction to that was defensive and no way. I didn't want to convert to something that I already felt was who I was all along. And somehow that felt like some sort of massive concession or apology. And so I was very resistant to the idea. But over the years, I came to appreciate that giyur, that sense of conversion, I didn't have to look at it from a kind of Christian Western point of view, that it was a turning and complete change or transformation of myself, a conversion story. It was, in Judaism, we think of anyone who comes to giyur as someone who is kind of affirming a Jewish soul that's always been in them. And so I saw giyur as a reaffirmation rather than a conversion in the way we often think of it. And when I understood it that way, and at the end of a 5-year process of like really an identity crisis over 5 years of my adolescence through college, I came to some place of peace, of recognizing how much this is who I am, but that I had chosen it. And so I was willing to have a giyur. I didn't do it to quell all the doubts of those most traditional Jews, because I wasn't going to have an Orthodox giyur with an Orthodox Beit Din of 3 rabbis, which is what you need to have as a Beit Din of rabbis, because I wasn't going to take on an Orthodox lifestyle, and that didn't feel authentic to me. But I did have a halachic conversion in that I went to a mikveh. I did have a Beit Din of 3 rabbis, including my hometown rabbi. And that ritual of dipping in the mikveh, of affirming my Judaism, it was profoundly important to me, and in many ways marked a transition that had already happened to me over the 5 years of accepting my sense of identity. I'm not sure it changed my status for other Jews, but it certainly shifted and affirmed my identity in a really important way.
And just the other piece of it, again, which we haven't talked about before, is this question of being a woman rabbi in the non-Orthodox world. In the space of really a generation or so, that has become completely routine, and it's just part of the landscape. But as you said, when you were growing up, certainly when I was growing up, it was really an unusual thing, and it was a big talking point. I'm just wondering, what you think of in the future, whether this will be confined to the non-Orthodox world, or whether you see movement in the Orthodox world in this direction. In other words, will it be the case that if we, the three of us, were sitting around talking in 50 years' time, there'll be Orthodox women rabbis, and it will come to seem as regular, normal, routine as it does now in the non-Orthodox world?
Oh, I'm 100% sure that this is going to happen because it's already happening. I was born in 1972, which is the year that Sally Priesand, the first female rabbi in America, was ordained. So that meant that I never lived a day of my life where there couldn't be a female rabbi. Yet it took decades before it became more normalized, and I certainly still experienced a great amount of sexism as a female rabbi, and people's curiosity and resistance to it as well. But 2009, Sarah Hurwitz was ordained as the first, Maharat, which was a different title than rabbi, but that's essentially the role she was playing. And since then, there is Yeshivat Maharat has ordained, I think, more than 100 Orthodox rabbis in America. They might not all call themselves rabbis. Sometimes they take the title Maharat or Rabbah, or now some of them rabbi. But the point is they're playing that role. And I'm seeing it also in Israel. There are women who are in the Orthodox movement who are getting smicha and are calling themselves different titles, but are operating in that way. So it takes a few decades for this to actually become more normalized, but someone has to start and blaze that trail, and then each one is kind of making a little chink in that stained glass ceiling. And I think that it is definitely happening. I had the privilege of speaking to a group of Maharat students, Orthodox women who were studying to become some form of rabbinic leader in their community. And I talked about what it was like to be a woman. And I talked about some of the incredible challenges and sexism, from comments about the way I looked or dressed to how I could possibly do this job with my 3 children, to all these different things that have been said to me along the way. And I said to them, but you're in communities that are openly resistant and hostile to female rabbis. So I really commend you. And afterward, one of these women came up to me and she said, you're commending us, but at least our sexism is overt and clear. She said, you're still facing it, but people there pretend that they're not at all sexist. So we're all fighting these battles in different ways in the worlds in which we habit. It's still hard to do something that hasn't been done before.
Oh, yes, it really is.
As you know, Yonit, as our first female anchor of a major station, and you enable the next generation to say, well, of course, I mean, can men be newscasters? Yonit's mine.
I like that. I like that thinking. Thank you for saying that. I do want to go back to the connection that you have with Israel, and it's also something very clear in the book, that story of your father giving you coins to drop into the Jewish National Fund box. All of that started very early. And you said that your visit there, you talked about visiting Israel at the age of 16. That connection obviously has become, the connection between diaspora and Israel has become quite fraught in the last 2 years. Do you see something, as the war continues, as this is, we're in the second year of this, we're fast approaching the 2-year mark on October 7th. Do you see things now differently than you did at the beginning? Are there insights that you have?
Yeah, the days of connection to Israel through the JNF box, that feels like such a nostalgic, simpler time, doesn't it? I was raised to really see Israel as my extended family. I did have a first cousin who made Aliyah when I was young, and he left in his 20s, got married, raised 4 children in Israel, and all the members of my Warnick family were deeply connected to Israel and made trips there. And so, but it wasn't just that they had to be blood relatives. There was a sense that this was our extended family. We had Israelis in my synagogue. My religious school director, Tova Achdut, was from Israel. And so these things helped me feel a sense that this was, I was deeply connected. And I think that is the language that I still think is the most useful, because I think we can disagree with our family members. We can sometimes, I think we because we love our family, I think we can offer tochacha, which is a kind of truth-telling or rebuke to our family that we love in a way that I think because we believe in them. But I think it really means that we don't walk away. And I know this has been tested. I think that I haven't actually made a secret of the fact that I have not been supportive nor trust this current Israeli government. I actually gave that sermon before October 7th on Rosh Hashana when we were Israel was in the midst of judicial reforms, and I talked about the challenge. But I know Israelis, rabbis, activists, my family, IDF soldiers, reservists, hundreds of thousands of you who have been engaged in the longest weekly protest movement that I have seen in a democracy. And these are Israelis that we are connected to, that we're fighting with. So to paint Israel with one brush for the government that is making these decisions, no one would do that and paint all Americans with the brush of what the Trump administration is doing right now. They wouldn't boycott Americans for having ICE agents in schools. These things are abhorrent. But nobody is doing that to any country but Israel. And I can speak out against a government that I disagree with or even don't trust, and at the same time say this is not Israel. So I hope that our community can understand that and still understand that this is family.
When you just said right at the end, you hope the community can understand that. I've had conversations with rabbis here, and including one just a few days ago over the weekend. They are really struggling to hold their communities together over this issue. Some of them will speak the way you do, but they will be aware that they have congregants who are way further to the left than that and way further to the right than that. And they have just found that keeping everyone coming and being under one roof is becoming a big challenge. Some have dealt with it by not speaking about Israel and the war. Others by, all kinds of ways. I'm just interested to know, partly because you've got such a large community, so there must be a real, by just numbers, there has to be a range of views there. What are you doing to keep people together, even as you have these yourself, your own very, deeply held strong views on this subject?
I have an incredibly diverse congregation, and it's demographically, geographically diverse, even religiously diverse, because I have a number of non-Jews, connected to Jews in the community that are part of it, racially diverse. Also ideologically, politically diverse, which, by the way, in America is rarer than you would think. We have basically lost the spaces where people who had ideological and political differences would gather together. Churches have been disintegrating, synagogues as well. The kind of social clubs that would bring people across difference together have started to disappear. People are siloing into their bubbles, as you know. So I actually think that this is a sacred obligation to keep this ideologically diverse community as one. And I think it's important for our democracy here in America that people do this, for our Jewish souls. And I know that having people who are pushing at me from different ends of this spectrum helps keep me more intellectually honestly, because I am constantly thinking from the perspective of where they're coming from. I'm constantly thinking, how do I articulate the view I don't agree with in the most respectful, strongest way possible? Because, by the way, that's Jewish to do it that way. This is how Jews have always done it. We express the minority opinion. We respect it. We offer it respectfully. And when we have to get inside that other perspective, we actually have to think about our perspective with more clarity. And in addition to that, what I'm trying to do is help our community transcend the kind of most base political differences and recognize the things that we actually agree on, because actually a lot of our values, which is what we want to create dignity for all people and respect and a sense of doing no harm for others, we want to serve something bigger than ourselves. So I do that actually, honestly, through music. Music in our services helps us transcend the differences. We do it when we serve something bigger than ourselves together. When we're serving feet feeding in our breakfast program, which we do every week, when people come together and help those who've come from being formerly incarcerated and give them a second chance, when we're working with refugee families in our community, when we are doing all this work together across our lines of difference, we're serving something bigger. We also remember each other's humanity. You can't demonize that person that votes differently than you if you've actually just served a meal to someone who's hungry together. It just changes your perspective. So yes, holding my community together is critically important. And it makes me think very hard about how I present something that is political, because, which doesn't mean I don't ever do it. It just means I do it in a thoughtful way. I do it recognizing and empathizing with the spectrum of my community when I speak.
Is there anything you wouldn't say? I mean, things that you sort of steer away from, topic-specific things you would not talk about?
Well, the IRS just recently said that they will now allow clergy to endorse candidates. And they haven't changed the law. They've just said, we won't come after you for it. I will not make partisan endorsements of candidates. I think that is a slippery slope of, the erosion of church and state, which in America has helped protect Jews and all religious minorities. I actually see what happens when there is no separation of church and state in Israel. And with all honesty and frankness, I do not think that has been good for Judaism. I think that it's made rabbis into politicians and bureaucrats, and it's actually poisoned Judaism to a certain extent that it has become so deeply politicized. And I do not think it's good for my community. So I will talk about issues that come up and play out in the political sphere, but I will not say, vote for this guy for mayor or not that guy, which, by the way, many of my congregants have asked me to do.
Yes, I can't imagine what candidate they have in mind in
New York. Who could you think about?
Especially in this season. Here's a challenge I hear a lot. I'm interested to know, in a kind of ask the rabbi way, how you would answer this question, because I hear it. Jews pride themselves on a tradition of ethics and morals, that there are such things as Jewish values. And yet, this year, as we go into Rosh Hashana, Israel stands accused of moral failure and worse. I mean, we know the words that are on the charge sheet against Israel, particularly around allowing a population to go hungry. And again, the Jewish roots of that idea go very deep. How do we reconcile that? Judaism that is committed to ethics and morals, and Israel accused of moral failure. How do you manage that in your own mind? I'm not talking now about how you talk to your congregation, just as a Jew and as a Jewish leader. How do you manage that?
I watch what is happening in Gaza, and I am devastated by it. My heart breaks, and I want this war to end as soon as it possibly can. And I think about hostages that are still in tunnels, and my heart breaks. And I am struggling, and I'm reading everything I can, including listening to your podcast weekly, to try to understand the truth of how intentional this is, how severe the hunger is. And I guess in some ways, is it a catastrophic level 5 famine, or is it a level 3 crisis? It's really hard to sort through all the noise, especially because so much criticism of Israel has in some ways been dishonest and sometimes in very bad faith. That doesn't mean we can ignore the plight. We have to bring food in. And I think one of the things that we Jews do really well, and we're about to do it at Rosh Hashana, is take stock and to do a moral accounting. This is who we are as Jews. I do not know the answer of what the extent of this hunger is on Israel. I know a huge amount of this responsibility is on Hamas, but that does not preclude us as Jews, and I hope Israel, for taking a moral accounting of what we have done, and to know that we can continue to make tshuva for it and to move forward in a different way. So I plead with the Israeli government and the Israeli people to continue taking a moral accounting of where we are. This is who we are as Jews. If we lose our moral core, we lose our souls.
In your wonderful book, you close each chapter with a word of Torah, which we would expect, in a way, from a rabbi. Each time you just unpack an idea or a word or a saying. And one is a phrase that is famous as a song, Geshet Sameod. Now, it's true that I lit upon this because I thought this will be an excuse for me to ask her to sing. But I also, when I was reading it, just loved what you said about it, the meaning of it as a phrase. So I thought if you could tell us about the gloss you put on this phrase, Geshet Sameod, which has become famous as a song. And then, because traditions must be observed, if you would then sing this rather beautiful song for us.
I grew up singing these words. It was at Jewish camp without really thinking about them, but it was composed by Baruch Chait for the Yom Kippur War, and essentially it takes the words of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, who says, "The world is a very narrow bridge," and he says, "the key is the ikar is to not be afraid at all, lo lifached klal," and that's a very hard thing. We're living in extremely frightening times. The idea that we would fear nothing is actually hard to imagine. It feels almost too naive. There's a lot of things to fear right now. Rising anti-Semitism, a war that continues on. There's a lot going on here in my own country that I'm deeply afraid of. Interestingly, when I looked at these lines again, partly in preparation for writing this book, I saw that the original of Nachman of Bratslav's words is not to not fear anything. It's actually the reflexive version of that word, to not bring fear upon yourself. So the idea is, don't bring fear upon yourself. Don't create the fear that doesn't need to be there. And I think that there are dangers out there that we have to obviously be aware of. But sometimes we create this fear in our minds that creates a reality that we don't want to live in. So I think that if I could say a message for this moment, we need to fight the things that are true dangers. We also need to not create fears that create a reality that don't yet exist, that actually create a world in which we all are fearful of each other. That's how I want us to go into this new world. Don't bring that upon yourself. Walk that narrow bridge one step at a time into this new year. Create the better world we all need to see. Kol haolam kulo geshet tsar me'od, geshet tsar me'od, geshet tsar me'od, kol haolam kulo geshet tsar me'od, geshet tsar me'od, לא לפחד כלל, והעיקר לא לפחד כלל.
That was marvelous. We feel like we're in Central Synagogue when we talk to you, which is quite an experience, I think, when when you're close to a Rosh Hashana. I can only use, I'm not going to sing because we don't want to scare our listeners away, but I can only quote the line that I love, and Jonathan hears it every year, but he's very tolerant to it. It's just one of my favorite lines in the Hebrew language from a song by Naomi Shemer, שיפה ושונה תהא השנה אשר מתחילה להיום. May the year that is coming upon us be beautiful and different than the year that has passed.
Amen to both of you, and for that sentiment. And to you, Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, the book is coming up soon. It is Heart of a Stranger, an unlikely rabbi's story of faith, identity and belonging. And we are so glad you led us into the new year once again, Rabbi Angela.
Thank you so much for having me. Wishing you all a sweet, healthy, better new year.
Thank you.
Amen to that.
We'll just say it. We'll do.
Well, we do like our traditions on this podcast, and that has certainly become one. Our Erev Rosh Hashana, our pre-New Year conversation with Rabbi Angela, and she never disappoints musically and in every other way. And that was beautiful. We should remind listeners, friends of the podcast, if you're not yet one, you can subscribe very easily. We're now, as we mentioned before, available on Apple Podcasts. You'll get a bonus episode. Our newest bonus episode is going to be all about this question of the movie industry and the move among a whole lot of filmmakers to boycott their colleagues in the Israeli film industry. And we're just going to get into that and talking about cultural boycotts. It's gained particular sharpness this week for reasons which we'll dive into in that bonus episode. But among others is the choice by the Israeli equivalent of the Oscars. Essentially, the big winner is a movie called The Sea. It's an Arabic language drama about a Palestinian boy from the West Bank who risks everything, including his life, to go to the beach in Tel Aviv. It's just, I think, a perfect example, we'll get into this in the bonus episode, of how cultural boycotts so often end up tripping up over their own feet. Because who are they boycotting? The people who've just nominated this film, about a Palestinian boy involving Palestinian filmmakers and actors and so on. I'm just not sure that many of the people signing up for this boycott, that this was exactly the target they had in mind. They're just attacking the very people in Israel who they probably would be most likely to find common cause with and agree with. It always happens with cultural boycotts. But as I say, we get into it in that bonus episode, which you can hear if you are a friend of Unholy. But speaking of tradition, Yonit, it is award season, 52 weeks of the year, rain or shine for us. So who are your nominees?
I mean, can I start with the mensch? Is it
Yes.
okay? So
Yes,
I
let's
would.
reverse
I
it.
think. I think the Mensch Award this week should go to Noam Tibon. Noam Tibon. The story is pretty well known in Israel. A retired general in the military who, on October 7th, went down south to, help try and save as many lives, including the lives of his son and family, Amir Tibon, who's a reporter for Haaretz, who live in Nachal Oz. It's really a remarkable, heroic story of October 7th. This film that was originally supposed to show in the Toronto International Film Festival was boycotted. There was a whole move around trying to get it back into the list. One of the people involved with that was Heather Reisman, who's the CEO of Indigo Books in Canada. She was very active there. Noam Tibon himself, Amir Tibon, and a host of other people trying to get this back. It was eventually, because of public pressure, returned and won an award in the festival. So I think I think they all deserve a Mensch Award, and Noam above them all.
Yeah. Well, we're going to keep with the film theme, I think, across the board for our awards, because the rival nominee for in our Mensch category is the 15-year-old actor Mohammad Razawi, who is the star of that movie we mentioned, The Sea. He won the Best Actor prize. And when on stage presenting actually another award, he said in Arabic, "I greatly enjoyed filming the movie and I'm very grateful. I wish for all the children of the world everywhere to have the same opportunity to feel equal and, most importantly, to live and dream without wars." And very hard, I think, for even the hardest heart to disagree with the sentiments of 15-year-old Mohammad Razawi. So 2 film-related Mensch Awards. A mention perhaps for the late Robert Redford. I mean, just on a sheer geek level, All the President's Men.
Legendary level.
Total legend, but I'm just going to say for anyone who is a Washington or journalism nerd, All the President's Men is holy writ, and he is obviously...
Are there any journalism nerds in this conversation? Really?
I think it's getting quite crowded.
At least 2.
There's certainly 2. So a mention for him. And then I think in our chutzpah category,
Wait a minute. What is your favorite Robert Redford film? What do you mean a mention? Let's pause on this for a second.
Okay,
what is
let's
your
linger.
favorite Robert Redford film?
Well, I'm sorry. I think it would be All the President's Men, just because I love that film so much.
But apart from that.
Besides that, oh wow, he's in so many things and so great in so many things. Well, I think Barefoot in the Park I always love. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very light but lovely. And The Sting, I think, is great. I'm not as big a fan of Butch Cassidy as probably everyone else, but I like it. What about you?
I would throw in The Great Gatsby in the mix just because it was probably
Yes.
one of my favorite books, and it's a wonderful adaptation. He's perfect for the role.
Yeah.
So I think that is, I think that.
Yeah,
but
no,
I mean,
I can't argue with that. Yes, and I'm just now thinking of all the others, Way We Were and all the others.
The Way
But
We
yes, he's
Were,
obviously
you're
Great
right about
Gatsby.
that.
And there's so many.
Maybe we should have a special bonus episode why Robert Redford should have been Jewish.
Can we think of even the vaguest most tenuous Jewish name? I'm really struggling. I didn't
Well,
think
The Way
any
We
of the
Were
films.
was with Barbara Streisand.
I
we
know
should think about it.
he produced or directed Quiz Show, and Quiz Show has a Jewish protagonist. So we got there eventually.
Nice, Friedland. Nice.
This is like a kosher version of 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, which is obviously not a kosher game, as the name suggests. So
And neither
we
is
come
Kevin
finally-
Bacon Jewish. You're not helping us at all.
I'm not helping. So finally, our Chutzpah Award, we're staying on theme. It's got to go to the culture minister in Israel, Miki Zohar. Miki, corrected. Miki Zohar, who has vowed to cut the funding for those Israeli Oscars, the Ophir Awards, as punishment for handing its top prize to this movie, The Sea, this Arabic language drama about the boy we talked about. The whole world is up in arms about cancel culture and free speech, and here is an artistic free expression. And just as the Israeli movie industry is getting from one side and being boycotted, he comes in and says, you've chosen the wrong kind of film. Me, a government minister, knows better. What should win Best Picture? A Chutzpah Award for Miki Zohar, I think. And so all our film-related awards, very much on brand for the awards season. I think you are in Paris taking in the gorgeous autumn sights. I think we will have just a few, and also the odd bit of work while you're there, I know, interviewing the president.
I'm in Paris chewing pencils and preparing for interviews and post-interviews. Yes, I definitely know how to party. We will, Sarah, thank yous to Michal Porat. Wish our listeners Shana Tova, and Jonathan, Shana Tova to you. Let's have a little bit less news this year, if we can. And
That's a good wish. That's such a good wish for everyone listening and for everyone involved in this region that we talk about so obsessively. A sweet and peaceful new year.